Being a fan of Japanese RPGs can often be an unrewarding or underwhelming experience as a gamer. Not because the genre is bad, mind you, but in recent years, we've seen many attempts to modernize or reinvent or restructure the way these games are played, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes we just want to play a new game that's a type of game that we like, have always liked, and don't need this sort of unnatural evolution or attempt at revolution to enjoy games in the modern generations. Nihon Falcom's The Legend of Heroes is a fascinating example of a series with deep ties to its JRPG roots, while still showing how to naturally evolve the genre into something more grand, more engaging, more immersive, and impressive than many of its predecessors before it. All while still being a series of relatively low-budget games. I didn't start playing these types of games until the early 2000s. Sure, Pokemon was all the rage before then, but it wasn't really a conventional JRPG, so I never saw it as a proper gateway. I knew of the Final Fantasy games, namely 7, as several of my friends loved it, but I never got a chance to play it. It wasn't until Final Fantasy X came out that the genre really got me interested, though I could never finish the game because we never owned a PS2, but we did own a Game Boy Advance, and several issues of those days' Nintendo Power magazine, and Golden Sun was all over them, and I really wanted it. Fast forward a few years, and Golden Sun: The Lost Age was probably my all-time favorite game for a while. But then, as I got older and more perceptive and times changed, some of the cracks started to show. Golden Sun as a series had a lot of plot holes and unresolved questions that the fandom had to try and fill in themselves. Golden Sun Dark Dawn came out after 7 long years of waiting, and was a mess of a game. Nintendo and Camelot weren't interested in continuing the series after that due to poor sales, despite ending on an unresolved cliffhanger. All the other JRPGs I tried out after that were dead series, one-offs, or, if they were a long-running franchise, each game was standalone. It wasn't until 2015 that this began to change, when Xseed announced they were localizing The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel. And not only that, they were selling the game for only $40. And not only that, you could get a shiny special edition for only $10 more? Sign me the hell up, I said. While waiting for that game to come out, I decided to buy The Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky for the PSP. This is where it all started. I want to talk about why this game and the Trails saga captivated me so much, and I want more people to enjoy the series to the same degree that I do now. The Legend of Heroes is my new Golden Sun. They've created a universe with near endless potential for deep storytelling, fascinating history, and engaging gameplay that works in tandem with the lore and law of the world. So far, we've seen 9 whole games, 1 spin-off, and there is 1 upcoming game releasing this year in Japan. And all of these games are set within the same timeline, in various regions throughout the world, which we haven't even seen half of yet. That's right, once you're in for the long haul. This is the hardest part to sell to people, that if you want to enjoy the series properly, you have to get caught up, preferably by playing them in order. That's a lot of hours, as all of these games are no shorter than 50 hours apiece, with some of the later ones taking some people, myself included, over 100 to finish. It may sound like a daunting task, but hey, might as well make use of your quarantine time, eh? The Legend of Heroes franchise dates back to before the Trails saga though. In 1989, a game called Dragon Slayer: The Legend of Heroes was released, which was part of the even older Dragon Slayer franchise, but would eventually separate from each other. A trilogy of games called A Tear of Vermilion, Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, and Song of the Ocean came out in the 90s. And you can see where much of the Trails saga's game mechanics derive from while playing it. I've played A Tear of Vermilion myself, and while I thought the game was pretty good, despite the hilariously poor translation by Bandai, I want to focus more on everything that came after that. The Trails saga is set in the years 1202 to 1207 in the fantasy continent of Zemuria, a place full of rich lore, diverse cultures, intriguing politics, as well as a dark and disturbing criminal underworld, all set in a world undergoing a technological revolution akin to our own world's industrial and even digital revolution. But instead of electricity, they have magical technology called orbments, with everything advancing at such an incredible rate that most of the world struggles to keep up. That's why a lot of locations in the game still look very medieval, but are very prosperous with various orbital devices replacing their conventional technology. In the games that have been released so far, we have traveled to the Liberal Kingdom, Crossbell State, and Erebonian Empire. The Liberal Kingdom is where everything started. Little did I know that this game would be the start of what I had been subconsciously desiring from JRPGs for as long as I had been playing them. Even throughout playing this game from start to finish, I didn't know anything about the interconnected timeline that spanned from this 2004 Windows XP era PC game to the current latest 2018 PS4 game. The saga begins with the story of Estelle Bright. Her father, Cassius Bright, a renowned hero of the Liberal Kingdom, brings an 11-year-old boy named Joshua into their home, who is gravely injured. Joshua's history is unknown to Estelle for as long as they grow up together, and eventually, they follow in their father's footsteps and become bracers, protectors of the citizenry who deal with many of the people's problems that the law cannot, or does not, handle, and are paid for it. This is where a lot of the game's story and plot progression revolves around. Joshua catches on to everything rather quickly, while Estelle, well, she's a complete dunce and incompetent at anything that doesn't involve hitting things with a stick, but learns and grows throughout the story in various ways, usually the hard way. A lot of the game's humor, charm, and memorability comes from their relationship with each other, and how they develop from being newbie bracers to strong and compelling characters, all while getting involved in uncovering a massive plot that's causing some serious problems in their home country. To be honest, while I was playing this game, it didn't seem all that special, just a game that does certain things very well. The battle system, for example, gives you a lot of options to toy around with, being able to customize character stats as well as their magic arts abilities as you see fit. It's pretty basic in this first game at least, but each subsequent game would continue to expand upon these mechanics, making each game continue to be fun to play, without getting stale even for series veterans. As for the overall plot of Trails in the Sky's first chapter, I actually didn't find it very interesting compared to many of the other games I had played before, but the main reasons for that were that, for one, I wasn't as invested into this world as I am now, and two, there are many subtleties and hints and little information tidbits that one would never be able to pick up on or appreciate in a first playthrough. So for my first time, I didn't understand what all the hype and good reviews were all about. But then, a certain event happens very late in the story, and it changed my outlook on the game entirely. Those who have played it will understand what I'm talking about, and I won't spoil it here. Needless to say, Trails in the Sky second chapter and the third directly follow the events of the first game, and man, this is where the plot really kicks off and shows its true colors and how deep this fictional world can be. I don't want to give away anything plot related, but I will say that second chapter expands on the first game's mechanics, starting you at a higher level, making them more complex and customizable than before. Then the third expands upon this even further, starting you off at freaking level 90. Since when do you get to start a game at level 90, huh? All in all, this is a trilogy of games that really caught me by surprise, and with a beautiful and hypnotizing soundtrack that complements the game very well. I highly recommend giving these games a shot if you want a good JRPG experience, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself sucked into the world like it has done to many other fans of the series. Only the first game was released on PSP in the West, but the whole trilogy is available on GOG and Steam. The next two games, however, for those who don't speak Japanese, you have to jump through a few hoops to play these games. Neither of them have been officially localized, but there are fan translations available for us to play them. For Zero, you can actually buy an official copy of the Japanese game and use a recently released patch made by very dedicated fans of the series. For Azure, you have to acquire the game, if you know what I mean, and its current translation is passable at best, but it's absolutely worth the effort. Both of these games take place in the state of Crossbell, a small, autonomous state with one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. Situated between Erebonia and Calvard, two nations that have been at odds with each other for a long time, much of Crossbell's problems come from the conflict between the two nations. And yet, Crossbell has to deal with its own share of internal problems, which is the backdrop of the story of Zero, a story about a new division of the police force made to deal with issues in Crossbell that conventional police, as well as the bracers, struggle with. Azure takes place directly after Zero, with the international conflict being more relevant to the story, and is considered the peak of the whole Trail saga according to many fans. I am inclined to agree. Azure is really incredible, with such complex politics and conflicting powers, both mundane and divine, woven into an already interesting story with unique characters in a magical and technological world. And yet, at the same time, both games are a very personal story from the perspective of Lloyd Bannings, an upbeat young man trying to live up to his late older brother's legacy in the police force, alongside his new team of unique members brought together by unique circumstances. These two games take place sometime after the Trails in the Sky trilogy and feature many references that spoil some of the plot points of those games, so I don't want to say too much about the story. I don't recommend playing them unless you have played all three Sky games. For the next game, however, we have to go back in time a little bit. Despite being the sixth Trails game, Trails of Cold Steel is a lot of people's introduction to the series, as it's had the most marketing flying around the interwebs here in the West. And to be honest, it isn't a very bad one to start out with, since it's largely disconnected from the events of the other games for most of the story. This game starts off a bit after Zero begins, meaning the two Crossbell games and the first two Cold Steel games are mostly concurrent. Cold Steel 2, however, features a segment at the end that's related to Crossbell, so be warned that it is much better to save that for later. Cold Steel's story centers around Thor's military academy and the Erebonian Empire, which, of course, it's a Japanese game, so they had to make it as Japanese shonen anime high schoolish and cringy as they possibly could. For the love of Eidos Japan, can you please stop? Please? Anyway, the story centers around the extra special Class 7, a class of students with unique backgrounds brought together by unique circumstances. Sound familiar? Most of the game is basically taking a tour of Erebonia on field studies, which is actually a pretty nice way of introducing the player to this particular region of the world. Each area you visit will have its own set of issues your class is tasked with dealing with, each getting more and more serious as the game progresses, until, of course, your class gets involved in a massive plot greater than they were expecting. Sound familiar? Cold Steel 1 was the second game I played after Trails in the Sky 1, and I really enjoyed the character interactions in this one despite the tropes that annoy me. Every character has a very well-developed, distinct personality, despite there being so many of them compared to previous games, and it was a joy to meet them all. With a couple exceptions, I guess. And the way the game rotates your party members in each chapter so that you get to experience various different party setups was brilliant, and ensures the game will never get repetitive, even throughout what will likely take a first-time player over 80 hours to finish. And that even prepares you for the second game, where you'll have so many options to experiment with that no two playthroughs will be the same if you don't want them to be. And after Cold Steel 2 is when everything starts coming together. Despite the shift in Western localization companies, Trails of Cold Steel 3 was my favorite game of 2019, and Cold Steel 4 is supposed to come out in the West later this year. Beyond that, I honestly don't want to say much about these two games for those who haven't jumped into the series yet. I've seen one YouTuber describe these two games as the Infinity War and Endgame of the entire series, meaning that without prior context, not only will these games make you feel quite lost, they will spoil those previous games for you as well, and you don't want that. Definitely save these two games for last. I'm looking at you, Nintendo fans. I know that Cold Steel 3 is coming to the Switch this year, but that is the 8th game of the entire Trails saga, yet it's the first game to be released on a Nintendo platform. Don't be a Nintendrone. If you have any interest in the series, go play the previous games first. You'll thank me later. Aside from that, due to everything I mentioned about how everything comes together in Cold Steel 3, I probably would not have enjoyed it nearly as much if I had not played most of the games that came before it. Yeah, I unfortunately did not play the Crossbell games before it because I was lazy and didn't want to deal with pirating or modding the games, so there were a lot of things that happened or that the characters talked about which I had no point of reference for. But now I've remedied that, and I'm fully ready for Cold Steel 4. And also, we have yet another game coming after that. Eventually. I know I've been heaping a lot of praise onto this series so far, but it isn't perfect. A lot of players will find the guided questline structure aggravating, as each game has a ton of missable content that is nearly impossible to see all of without a guide. I found the best way to deal with this was to just accept it. Each game has a New Game Plus feature that is perfect for doing a 100% run with a guide after you've already beaten it, which you'll have to do if you want all the achievements anyway. But one thing that may dissuade someone from doing so is that the games can be criticized for being heavily padded with unnecessarily long, non-essential dialogue segments and cutscenes that always, and I mean always, start with a slow panning camera shot of the environment, even for places you've already seen multiple times, seemingly just to pad the game's length even more. Thankfully, the game's later re-releases have addressed these issues by adding a turbo feature that more JRPGs would benefit greatly from. And to be honest, this is the biggest reason why I would not recommend the PSP version of Trails in the Sky, or the PS3 and Vita versions of Cold Steel 1 and 2. They don't have this feature. As I mentioned before, these games are niche and don't have a high budget, so the jump from sprites to full 3D in the Cold Steel series was a rough one. The character models and animations are pretty rough, and it can be distracting. I expect it to improve over time, of course, and it has, slowly. But to me, it's not a big deal. Most of the issues I mentioned aren't a big deal. The biggest deal to me is an issue I have with a certain aspect of the story and characters, but I won't talk about that here because spoilers. Still though, all of these flaws and nitpicks are a small price to pay to enjoy such a wonderful series, and I would hope that it would not dissuade you from trying it out if you haven't yet, as I could point out many things like these in just about any game, including my all-time favorites. And you can too. Don't be a fanboy. And while we're on that subject, if you don't want to be spoiled on anything, I strongly recommend not following anyone in the fandom on social media, or looking up anything related to series lore, such as on the Wikia, or joining any community related to the series until you're caught up. Unfortunate as this may be, the fandom of this series seem to have little regard for posting spoilers publicly online, and while the Wikia does give spoiler warnings at the top of the pages, it would be better if they marked which sections of the pages had spoilers instead, or do both. I tried really hard to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible while still trying to convey why I like the series so much. Every clip I use in this video was taken from the first hour or two of each game only. Others don't take such things into consideration when sharing things about these games, so be careful. And I think that's about everything I have to say, so if you're new to this series, I hope this video was helpful. If you liked the video, let me know in the comments section if you'd like to see more in the future. I'd be open to do another one on another series I love, such as the Xeno series, the Atelier series, the Neptunia series, Golden Sun, freaking Guitar Hero, or if anyone watching this has played The Legend of Heroes before, would you be interested in a spoiler opinion video? Or I could complain about something instead. Live up to my channel name? A lot of crap in the game industry really annoys me, but I've never really felt compelled to express that, since plenty of other YouTubers already do that better than I could. Anyway, my main hope with this video is to spread the love of the series, and that it inspires someone out there to play it and grow to love it as much as I do. Or maybe I convince you not to play it. Well, I just saved you lots of time and money then, didn't I? You're welcome, Internet. Also, don't watch the anime, it's fucking trash.